Thank you for joining me today. And I've got a very interesting series. We're going for a series now where we've got a number of episodes. And I want you to think about this, whether you're a mentor, whether you're a parent, whether you're a friend. I want you to listen to this series because it's applicable to whatever you are. So whether a friend, mentor, parent, this can apply to you. And the series is all around the mistakes that mentors make. A lot of times we want to know the things that we're doing well. We want to know our strengths. We want to know our areas of genius, which is always great. But we also want to know the areas where we can improve, the areas where we can be strengthened. And that is what makes us even greater at what we do. So today's series and the episode that we're starting today is all around communication. So I'm going to be touching on 4 communication mistakes that can be made, not just by mentors, but by friends. That's what I'm saying. It could be by parents, it could be by partners. So you have to understand, if you're one of those things, you could be making these mistakes. And it's especially for people that are mentoring and people that are doing mentoring sessions. So I want you to be able to learn, and I want you to be able to be developed as an individual, and I want you to be able to grow in your communication skills. So the first thing I want to talk about, when we talk more than we are actually listening. Sometimes the way that this can turn out and what it can look like in those moments, it can be like we're dominating conversations or we're interrupting people when they're speaking. And when you're a mentor, if you're interrupting the person that is speaking, it can prevent them from sharing everything that they want to share. And sometimes it's us even just sharing our story too quickly, or even sharing our solution too quickly. And we may be interrupting the person and stopping them from sharing what needs to be shared for us to understand how to provide an even better solution. And the impact and what that can do for mentees, that they can feel unheard. The person that you want to speak can feel like you're not even listening to them, and that could prevent them from sharing more, and it can reduce their confidence. And for you as the mentor or the listener or the parent or the friend, you can miss insights. You can miss the things that they really wanted to share, and now they no longer have the confidence to feel that they can share. There could be less reflection, and in these situations, it prevents you from being as effective as you can be as a mentor. So as a mentor, you're more effective when you're able to listen, you're able to understand what is being shared, and you're able to reflect, and then you're able to present ideas. And one of the great alternatives for great mentors is being able to listen to understand, not just listen to speak, but listen to understand, what is this person going through? Why are they sharing this? Sometimes it's not even just the things that they're sharing. It's about what are they not saying. And it's hard to even hear what they're not saying when you don't give them the chance to share. And the reflection question really is, how can I do things differently? How can I have this moment of influence with this person? They could be my mentee. They could be a child. You know, they could be your child as a parent. They could be a friend. You've got this moment of influence. How can you utilize this moment more effectively and enable them to share more that you can influence and you can encourage more? So that's the first one that I wanted to share. The next one, and this was something that I really was impacted by as a mentor and growing in mentoring. This is the other mistake that mentors can make, is fearing the silence. Now, I know that silence can be awkward, you know, and what it can look like is filling every pause. You know, when there's a pause, that there's got to be a word in there. You know, when there's a pause, there's got to be something else that's shared. And sometimes that just can be like a sense of nervousness. And sometimes even just answering your own questions instead of waiting for the mentee to answer the question. Sometimes you can ask a question and then you want to answer it, and then you're not even getting the answer from the mentee in the way that they could answer it. And changing topics quickly, that's what it can look like. Instead of just allowing the pause to be natural, and the person could say something now instead of like you changing the topic. But when you change the topic, you can end the conversation prematurely. And avoiding that awkwardness, that's what a lot of times happens. And the impact of that is that there can be shallow responses. because you're like forcing responses to be made, and you can be preventing them from reflecting, because that silence could be thinking time. That silence could be reflection. And when we stop the silence, we reduce the thinking time, and we have missed breakthroughs, because there could be a breakthrough that is coming from that person having an epiphany and that person having a revelation, and then them sharing because they've had the time to think. But we want to be able to understand that really great mentors, they allow the silence, because let the silence do its work, because the silence can be encouraging deeper thought, deeper reflection, deeper contemplation. And when you are in that mode of listening and allowing the silence to be a part of the listening process, you're going to encourage your mentee to be able to develop their own thoughts. And sometimes this is what's even powerful about people that are introspective. You know, when you've got people that are introspective and you've got people that are introverts, a lot of times that silence, they like that silence. And a lot of times the silence isn't necessarily an awkward silence. It's a processing silence. It's a silence that they're going through to be able to think what to share. So that's something to really reflect on going forward. When you're listening to a friend, when you're listening to a child, when you're listening to a mentee, is allow the silence to be silence when it needs to be, so you can move on to what needs to be shared. The next mistake that can be made by a mentor when you're in a mentoring relationship or when you're in a mentoring scenario is giving advice instead of asking questions. How many times as a mentor or as someone that has been more experienced, you feel like you want to share what you've learned, or you want to give them a picture of what the solution could be, when sometimes it's about how do you ask more better questions to help them to find their own solution. And when we give advice instead of asking questions, it can look like this. It can be telling mentees what to do, telling them what their next action is, when if you give them the opportunity to develop their next action, they're going to do something that they actually believe is the right thing to do. It could be assuming your experience applies. Sometimes, even though you've gone through a similar lesson, your answer may not be the answer for that person. So think about that. As a mentor, a lot of times it is about sharing our experience, and it is about sharing what we've learned from that time that we had that lesson. But we're all individual, we're all unique, and that person that you're speaking to, their lesson and their solution might be different than yours. So being able to ask questions instead of giving advice is going to be really important. And it also prevents you jumping to conclusions, because it's easy to jump to conclusions because it's what's in your mind. And it can be creating this moment where you're acting as the expert. And even as a mentor or as a parent or someone that's got a lot of knowledge and understanding, you may be the person that has got an advantage in this situation, but sometimes it's being able to ask the questions, and that's what really is powerful, because it's not always the person that's got the answers, it's the person that's got the powerful questions that is going to be able to help someone to learn something. So when we give advice instead of asking questions, we reduce ownership, because if you allow the person to come up with their own solution, they will take ownership of their own solution. You also prevent them from having less critical thinking, because critical thinking is a skill. And if they are asked questions, then they're developing that. And it even promotes lower confidence, because if you're always providing the answer, you're going to be taking away their opportunity to grow and their opportunity to act. And that takes away their opportunity to grow in confidence. So as a mentor, as a great mentor, as someone that does mentoring well, as I said, whether that's a parent, whether that's a friend, it's being able to think of better questions And those better questions helps to unlock better answers. And it also enables those that you're working with to see things in a way that they never saw before. So if that's something that you've done or something that you've been experiencing, the reflection point is just thinking, what could you do differently in that situation when you're tempted to give advice instead of asking questions? So the final communication mistake that is made by mentors and even those that are in positions of authority, and even in relationships, I think that this can be an awkward one for a lot of us, is being afraid of difficult conversations. We all can be in situations where we don't want to have a difficult conversation, and in mentoring, that can be us having some confrontation or us even calling out our mentee. As a parent, that can be us having those kind of edgy conversations where we have to correct. But it's necessary, and whenever you're mentoring, wherever you're guiding, whenever you're encouraging, having difficult conversations is a part of how you cause the person you're working with to grow. And sometimes what that looks like when we're avoiding difficult conversations is that we avoid uncomfortable topics. You will know what's uncomfortable because sometimes it's like the thing that could be awkward to talk about. And us just avoiding that just takes away even the opportunity to have a conversation that could be very fruitful. It could be like ignoring accountability, because the accountability is, if you're asking these questions, you're going to be in a position of accountability to some extent. It could be softening feedback. Sometimes the feedback is a tough thing that you have to share. It's something that's going to cause them to sometimes feel uncomfortable. But once it's said in love, once it's said in care, it's something that needs to be said, and it's going to help them to go to a next level or grow in some shape or form. It could be avoiding challenge. But that challenge a lot of times is not just for yourself, it's for your mentee. And sometimes when we're thinking about avoiding these things, are we really thinking about our mentee, or are we trying to avoid the feelings of discomfort that we're feeling, or the situations that we're going to experience because it's uncomfortable? Is it about us more than the mentee? So that's something that we need to really consider when we're thinking about these things. And the impact it can have is that really when you don't have difficult conversations, the blind spots remain, because a lot of times it's not that someone doesn't want to grow or they don't want to do something in a better way. Sometimes it's just a blind spot. It's something that they cannot see. And sometimes that difficult conversation is bringing what is in their blind spot into their vision. So that is really important. It slows growth when we don't have those difficult conversations. And one of the biggest problems is that it allows problems to continue. So when we avoid that discomfort, then the problems that we actually want to talk about can continue. And then we've got missed developmental opportunities. That's the impact of when we avoid difficult conversations. And as a great mentor, the alternative is that we need to care enough to challenge. We need to care enough for our mentee. We need to care enough for our child. We need to care enough for our partner. We need to care enough for those that we're working with to be able to address difficult conversations, difficult subjects, and difficult topics. So I hope that you've learned something from looking at these different communication areas that we can make mistakes in. And if we can work on these areas, and by working on these areas, if we can listen deeply, if we can create those spaces to reflect, and we can ask powerful questions and have courageous conversations, it can encourage those that we're working with to grow and to be authentic and to respect us even more as mentors. So, as I said before, whether you're a mentor, whether you're a parent, whether you're a friend, these things are relative to you as well. So I hope that you've been able to take something away from today's session. And I hope that you can share this with someone. Write in a comment what was relevant to you in what area do you feel that you can grow in, and what area could you impact someone that you're working with? So I want to say thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you next week.